Hello, my name is Trevor, and today we're going to dive in and take a look at Hyperborea 3rd Edition, the much anticipated update to one of my favorite OSR games. We've played it, and I gotta tell you, I love it, and I'm looking forward to giving you my first impressions, so get ready to crush your enemies and see them driven before you today on Rolling with Advantage. So before we dive in today, I do want to give you a quick history of my discovery of this game. I've been DMing for 30 years or so, and I started with D&D 2nd edition, and then kind of went into Holmes Basic. I've kind of gone through the whole adventure of going through Dungeons and Dragons, and I've played a lot of other games too, and I've played a lot of modern games. And one thing that keeps drawing me back to playing these older style games is the realism, and it's gritty, and also the fact that survival is not something that is a given. Like, death happens, like characters die, bad things happen. It just feels more real. So if you're a fan of like Lovecraft or Conan or things like that, that is really what this game is based around. I mean, the world itself is based on the writings of Clark Ashton Smith, H.P. Lovecraft, and then some Robert Howards, all kind of like fused together. If you're familiar with Appendix N, all of the books that kind of inspired Gary Gygax to make the world of Dungeons and Dragons back in the day, all of those writings are kind of splattered in here together. And it just creates this new and this fresh world, but it's also familiar because wherever you are in your journey of playing, fantasy games, you've read something that has been inspired, or you've watched something that's been inspired by these. So it has this weird fiction of a mesh between fantasy and sci-fi, kind of meshed together. You'll have things like, players running around with, laser swords, or they'll also have like ray guns or even flamethrowers and stuff. But it's also grounded in this really gritty, fantasy, weird fiction world. Think John Carter of Mars and that type of thing. It's a beautiful setting, and I've got to just give a huge shout out. The guy that created this game, Jeff Talanian, he infused so much creativity into this that it really sparks your imagination. The rule set for this game, as we go from 2nd edition to 3rd edition, it's not a huge change. There are some minor changes and tweaks, but it was one of those things like the tweaks that needed to be happened kind of called for a new edition. It wasn't like simply like we need to errata this or that. And after they played this for years, they saw little things that need to be changed. And once you add all those things up, we needed to have a new edition. Another big change that they made moving in is this is 2nd edition. Now, 2nd edition Hyperborea was this giant hardback tome, which I loved for the value of it. The issue is that this is a player's handbook. It is a referee guide. It's a monster manual. There's an adventure, and it's all in one tome, which is cool. But you can also stop a bullet with this thing, and so trading this around the table and things for players kind of got cumbersome. So what he ended up doing is, in this edition, we have a separate player's handbook and then a separate, DM guide, or referee's manual as they call it. And the referee's manual it's a DM guide, but it also has the monster manual in it as well. And then like treasure and things like that. Things we would normally see. But I like the fact that he separated it into 2 books, because there's so much that he's put into this game. It just got to be where there was too much to have in one volume, in my opinion. So I loved the fact that he did it in 2nd edition, but the more I've played it, the more I'm like, I'd like to have this in 2 different books. So I think it's very, very cool. I applaud that. So that's a minor thing they did, that by separating the books. I'm going to go through and find a few things that have made this game a little different in 3rd edition, the things that my first impression of the game. I will go ahead and be full admit, I am a fanboy of this game. I generally, when I pick up these games like this, I'm very hesitant, just because there are so many games on the market. Like, why play Hyperborea? And to me, it boils down to the setting. the writings of the Appendix N and all of that. Like, I love the setting itself. And also the rules, like, it kind of throws back to me playing 2nd edition D&D. I mean, THAC0 is there. It's not called that, but it's there. You know, you're dealing with the AC that's kind of different than what you're used to. It's not hard. You just have to kind of remember how to do it. And there's a little bit of the combat is not as simple as, you know, as a 5th edition D&D. It has crunchier, so you've got to know, like, you know, I get a -2 whenever I'm dual wielding, or I get a bonus whenever I'm flanking. Fortunately, I will say that everything, all of the charts that you need for this game, the DM screen that they made for this is amazing. It's probably the best DM screen I've seen in any game. I highly recommend you pick it up because it's really easy just to go through and find every chart. I have ran 12 to 15 games of Hyperborea, and I will say that the DM screen is huge, and I highly recommend you picking it up. I'm sure they're going to do an update for 3rd edition. So far, I've only seen one thing I would add to the DM screen, and I'll go over that here in a second. So I think the 2nd edition DM screen is pretty much perfect. There might be like a tiny little tweak that they need to do for a 3rd edition update, but like I said, I've only found one thing so far that I wish was on the DM screen that was new for 3rd edition. So I'm going to kind of go through and show you again what you're getting with this game. Is the art is amazing. I am a huge fan of this art. It kind of makes me feel like I'm opening up and reading Savage Sword of Conan again from the 70s or 80s, and I love the art style that he goes through. So this is what we're first looking at. This is the player's manual. I am not going to go through everything. I'm going to kind of give you some highlights and just kind of show you some things that have been tweaked. One of the things I absolutely love about this game as we kind of go through is we'll see each of the chapters has this border art around it, which is just great. It's this black and white art. It kind of makes me feel like I'm reading Savage Sword of Conan. And when we go down, you'll see a lot of Easter eggs placed there. You know, you'll see where some of this writing came from. You'll actually look at this page right here on the bottom left. You'll actually see H.P. Lovecraft down at the bottom, the Weird Tales, and then also the Hyperborea, which is Clark Ashton Smith. And you'll kind of see all these things kind of hidden through there. So I've had a lot of fun flipping through these books and just trying to see if I can catch a lot of the references. And it's a very cool nod to the genre as we go through. So now we're going to take a look at character classes. Now, all of the classes, there are no new classes. They didn't take anything out. They just basically tweaked a lot of them. One of the things that we see here is we have the principal classes. Now, these are the first 4 classes that you pick. These are the ones that are super focused on what they do. The fighter, the magician, the cleric, and the thief. They level a little bit faster than the other subclasses that we'll see. And a lot of times, I think players will look over these and skip past them because they want to play something more like a subclass that's more like specialized or hybrid. But I will say these are very, very powerful. So if you're kind of new to the game, pick up a fighter, and they are very good at murdering people. But one of the things that we see with 3rd edition is we have these new splash page art that kind of shows and gives a little bit of an explanation of what each one of these are, which I think is very, very cool for a new player who's making a character and say, hey, what do I want to do? And to get these little blurbs about each one of these, I think really helps. So these are what we're looking at here are the principal classes, and we go through and we see the 7 fighter subclasses. All this is new art, new explanation of what they do. We see the 5 mage subclasses. We scroll down here, we see the 5 cleric subclasses, and then finally the 5 thief subclasses. And I love the Purloiner has this just absolutely just metal mohawk. I think that's pretty cool. But this is what we have as we go through here. See, as you can see, you have a lot of options, the same options we had in 2nd edition. We just have new art, new explanation into 3rd edition. Character creation is almost identical. There's one tiny little change as we go through here, but it's more options. And one of the things that we'll take a look at as we go through these characters is each one of these has new art. Do we get to see? But one of the big things that we go through, and there are a lot of these little minor tweaks, and that's one of the things. It's almost been like a little treasure hunt to see the little changes that they made. Is I want to go through one of the things we found immediately in our live stream game. We have a player that was playing a barbarian, and we also have a paladin. And one of the things we found immediately was that the weapons that they are masters of, in 2nd edition, they could only be the master of 1 weapon to start the game. Now they start with 2, and even though that doesn't seem like a lot, It is, because being the master of a weapon gives you more better chance to hit. It does more damage. It increases your attack rate. And now all of a sudden, instead of saying I'm only good with this, well, now I'm also good with a ranged ability too, like, daggers or bows or whatever. We saw that hit immediately when our players are like third level, and they're like, hey, all of a sudden now I'm better at these weapons. We had to kind of explain it in the story, but it was pretty cool to have the ability to say I'm automatically better, and I got to see a little bit of a tweak moving into third edition. Now, probably the subclass that got the biggest bump moving from second edition to third edition. We saw a lot of minor tweaks here and there, but the biggest is the monk. I never had a monk at the table, but I had read a lot of places that they just seemed to be a little bit weaker than a lot of the other subclasses. And what they did to change that is really, when you think about a monk, they attack really, really fast. So what they did is they gave him an attack rate where they can attack twice immediately starting at level 1. Now, this doesn't stack with two-weapon fighting. I actually asked specifically about that. This basically makes it, because two-weapon fighting in this game, you can do it, but there are some penalties to that, which we see traditionally in old school games. This one, the monk can just attack twice without any of those penalties. So it's not like you could do both and you get like 3 attacks. It's just you can get 2 straight attacks starting at first level, which in this game, which can turn into like a hack and slash game, having the ability to roll an attack twice in a round is very, very powerful. So I'm excited to see what the monk looks like now that that they've kind of had this little bit of a buff. From what I've read on the Hyperborea Discord and on some of the forums, a lot of people are super excited about this, and they feel like increasing the attack rate can really like fix a lot of the issues that the monk had, particularly I guess at the lower levels before they kind of got caught up with others. So I'm excited to see a monk at the table, and hopefully we'll have one introduced soon. I'm pretty excited to see what the new monk looks like, but that's, from what I understand, that's one of the biggest changes moved from second edition to third edition for the classes, was the increased attack rate for the monks. Another big change going from second edition to third edition is we saw the inclusion of more race options. Now, every playable race in Hyperborea is all variations of humans. You're not going to see like orcs or elves or anything like that. Probably the strangest thing that you're going to see in this game is an Atlantean, which is a human that has little gills. But mechanically, all of the races are the same, with the exception of the Atlantean, which has the ability to breathe underwater. Everything else in the game mechanically is the same. It's more about the feel of the race and just how you role play, or maybe the things that the customs you or maybe even the knowledge that you have or where you're from. And traditionally we saw the first list that I've got up here, the primary races. Everything in this game has a random chart, which I absolutely love random charts. And sometimes I will say, when we do character creation, I kind of randomize everything except when it comes to race. I let people pick that, because to me, this is like, how do you visualize your character? Maybe you want to play this, and then, you roll up, a Viking, but I didn't really feel this with a Viking. So I let my players choose the race, just because to me, it's not mechanical. It's just, how do you see your character? And to help with that, they added new race options. So if we scroll down to the next page, we have ancillary races. And there's a lot of things here I'm super excited about, that we need, like Anglo-Saxons, Romans, Greek, I'm excited about, Moor, like there's a lot, Roman, there's a lot of new things here, and even things you probably never heard of, like a Lemurian, and also some different, Eskimo Ixian mixes and things like that. So there's a little bit of like discovery for people. Like, you may find a race you never heard of, and you kind of look up and goes, oh, this is from these Conan books or something, and it kind of pulls in what the feel of the world is. So I'm excited to see new race options on here to kind of help populate the world, and each one of these has a little bit of a description of who they are, maybe the religion they might be tied to, and that might be something else too when you think about what race. If you've got a religion in mind, you might want to take a look and say, hey, I want to play an Eskimo. But they, a lot of times they worship Cthulhu or something like that. So you might want to take a look at those things to see if it kind of fits exactly what you're looking to. But that's one of the changes we saw, like I said, from second edition to third edition, as we get more race options. Probably the absolute biggest change moving from second edition to third edition is going to be combat. Combat before and in older editions we saw had 2 different phases. It caused a lot of confusion. Because there were certain things you do in the first phase and certain things you do in the second phase. and it created some confusion. From my understanding, some people picked this up, ran with it, and totally understood it. I was not one of those people. It was square peg, round hole for me. I remember going to the forums and asking all these questions like, why are there two phases? Can't we just do it all in one? So I don't know if I was just slower than everybody else. But from what I understand, there were definitely two camps of this. Either you got it or you didn't. Unfortunately, I was in the didn't. So I always play the game with one phase because the second phase just seemed odd to me. Unless you were like holding an action or something, then I could kind of understand. So fortunately, they said, okay, we're gonna make it one phase. And it didn't make the combat like too simple. Like, it's still a crunchy OSR game. You still have all of the numbers that you need to know. Like, hey, I get a bonus because I'm flanking the guy, or I have the high ground, or, all of those little plus and minuses that you still need to know in combat are still there. So I feel like it still feels like an OSR game. We've just kind of gotten it down into one phase. So I'm very, very thankful for that. So here in the combat section, they have like the combat sequence of like, melee goes and missile goes. But you got to remember, in this game, we have dynamic initiative. So what happens is that the way this game works is that every round initiative can change. You have basically the referee rolls for all the monsters, 1 dice for everybody. And then I kind of go through and have each player take turns rolling the dice. There's no bonuses. It's a straight D6 roll. So if my players roll a 5 and I roll a 4, the entire party of players goes first, then I go. And then next round, we roll again. And if I roll a 5 and then they roll a 3 or whatever, then I go first. I like this because it changes and it can create situations where anytime you have a situation like this where it flips, you're going to have something where either the players or the monsters get to go 2 times in a row, and that can completely change the outcome of the combat. I have seen where the monsters got to go twice in a row, and all of a sudden they went from, hey, we're handling this, to, oh, we are in trouble. Because, the orcs or whatever it is they're fighting, they got to go again. So it's interesting to see how the dynamic, and that's something that's always bothered me in other games, is how a static initiative kind of creates this where you're just kind of waiting for the inevitable to happen. I love that every round we're like, I hope we get to go. I hope we get to go. And it creates a lot of chaos, which I love. Another giant change in this game, at least for me, is one of the things that I liked is they have a critical hit chart. And I absolutely love this. And generally in games, I don't like critical misses. Well, in 2nd edition, we didn't have that. I've always had a problem with my fighter attacks 2 or 3 times in a round. His odds of rolling a 1 go up dramatically. And then all of a sudden he rolls a 1 and he drops his weapon. It's like, or whatever terrible thing happens to him. I've always had a problem with that. So at my table, I always just threw out the whole critical miss thing. But now they've got an optional rule in this edition where they have a critical miss chart, and I love charts, and I gotta say, I think this is the greatest marriage of having a critical miss at the table. And let me show it to you. So first, critical hit. Now this is from 2nd edition, and if you look at the chart that we have here, depending if you are a fighter or a fighter subclass, a cleric or a thief or a magician, you basically have different D6 charts you roll on. So obviously, on the crit chart, for critical hits, the fighters have a greater chance to do more damage than, a magician who, hits someone over a stick, but they still get to roll a d6 to see how much damage they do. It can vary from doing +1 or +2 damage on the roll to triple damage. So it makes sense that the fighters would be better at dealing that max damage. Now, the thief still can, but like the magician should never be able to do as much damage with, a stick or a sword or whatever it is they have than the fighter. And I love the fact that this kind of shows that. Now, the inverse of that has been the critical miss. I personally have never put critical misses in my games because I always I did way back in the day and I just didn't like it. And since then I've taken it out. But what we have now is this critical miss chart, which I love because it is the exact idea of the previous chart flipped. Instead of a D6, it's a D12. Now what we see is that if a fighter rolls a 1, he then rolls a D12. And 1 through 6, it's just a bad miss. Nothing bad happens. And then above that, it can go from dropping weapons to stumbling to tripping to hitting an ally to hitting yourself. So I like the fact that the chaos of combat is still there, And there's this like moment of, oh, did something terrible happen? But it's not going to happen as frequently as a 5% chance every time the fighter swings his sword, something terrible happens. I've always had a problem with that. So I love the fact that now we've got this extra chart to roll on. I'm a big nut for charts anyway. I love random charts. So I love this. We used this in our first game, and it actually worked for the players. One of the bad guys rolled a critical miss, and it really helped the party. So it kind of goes both ways, but it added that extra element of chaos. So I really, really enjoy that. So even though I think this is considered an optional rule, I would absolutely encourage DMs to include the critical hit and the critical miss charts. I love them. One other addition for 3rd edition is the name generator. This is huge. Again, I love random charts. But before, this was like a PDF that they had made up on the website, and this was one of those things, like, as soon as I saw it, I printed it out, handed it out to my players, just to give an idea, like, maybe we don't know what a Hyperborea name is, or how do we name an Amazon, and what I love is this, is it kind of gives you kind of the phonetics of how you would pronounce these things, and also like what it looks like, and I love this, and I'm glad that it's actually in the book. So this is a great addition. This is one of those things that, was like a side chart on the website, and I'm glad that they brought it in, especially now that we have new races. So we have ideas for Greek names, and of course we have Hyperborean names, all these different options. Again, I love the art. But as we go through here, we see all the different options for the name. So I think this is a huge addition. I'm really, really glad they added that for 3rd edition. Moving over to the referee manual, what we saw here is that this has some tidbits to teach you about what it's like to play in an OSR game. What's it like to play in Hyperborea? How to make it feel like Hyperborea. And I think this is a great read, and I think this is the idea, is to kind of have that pulp fantasy adventure, and it gives some great tips on how to run that type of game. Now, the other thing that we get is we get the ability to take a look and see, what the monsters, what the treasure is, but also the Gazetter. So let me kind of go through each one of those. You have a bestiary through here, which is great. Again, I just do shout out this art. I love this art so much. But you go through and you get to take a look at the monsters. And I will tell you, of the monsters I've looked at so far, I haven't seen any huge changes from 2nd to 3rd edition. Some of the art has changed, but I haven't seen mechanically any difference yet. I'm sure there's little ones out there, and I'm sure we'll find them. But the thing that I like about this, and if you're playing an OSR game, let's say you've been playing 5th edition D&D or another modern game like Pathfinder or something, just because you think you know a monster from one of those games, you really need to read all of this, because a lot of the abilities in this game are brutal. I'll give you an example. A zombie in other games, a minor nuisance at best. In this game, they can wipe the party. Death can happen extremely fast from minor ability. A zombie bite, if you don't have cure disease, will straight kill somebody. So you got to think more like Walking Dead than you would, like 5th edition D&D or something. Like, it is a much more lethal game. So I encourage people, really read through the monsters, really understand them, because you may throw something at the party and I think it's that lethal, and all of a sudden you got a wipe on the table, which can happen, and that's totally fine. It's Hyperborea, but just be sure that you read through everything, because the whole idea of these monsters, that this is a dangerous world and this is brutal. And they really did a good job of bringing that in. So one of the monsters I would like to showcase here, first off, is I want to show off they have the color Out of Space, which is a total pull from H.P. Lovecraft, which is great. But also, like, even things in this game like giant crabs. Now, in my game, we had a whole adventure with giant crabs, and it's one of those things you're like, okay, giant crabs, whatever. No, these things will straight murder you in this game, and it kind of pulls in what the feel of this game is that these things, of course, you think, okay, they're a crab. They've got, big shells. They've got the big pincers. Okay, that's fine. They also have laser gauntlets in this game, or in my game, I changed it instead of having like a laser gauntlet to like shooting it out of their eye. But when you have crabs come out of the surf and they're shooting lasers and like, murdering people with that, it automatically changes when you think about this game immediately. They're like, oh, there's a crab. Oh, he's shooting lasers. That's Hyperborea. It's this weird fiction, and I love the art. I love the idea. And if you're running Hyperborea for the first time, look for little things like this to kind of show off the differences of this, because as soon as that happens, you look up and go, oh, this game is totally different. The setting is different, and it's pretty exciting to play. As far as treasure goes, what we're going to see is a bunch of random charts that I absolutely love. Every monster has like a class of treasure they can go through. I'm not sure if any of this was tweaked or not, moving from 2nd to 3rd edition. I love random charts. I roll random on all of the treasure in my game, so sometimes they get nothing, sometimes they get something entirely too powerful, and I'm totally okay with that. Let's just roll it and just make it as random and as fun as possible. And again, it creates a lot of chaos. But I love the fact that we have the return of the random treasure, whether it's gold or jewelry or different magic items. All of that is randomized, and I absolutely love it. Even like, you find a gem. Well, what kind of gem is it? Oh, it's an obsidian. Oh, okay. What's that worth? What's the size of it? All of that can be randomized, which I think is an absolute beautiful thing. The final thing that I do want to talk about is the Gazetter. I talked about this when I reviewed the 2nd edition game, and I just want to come back to it. They've added a little more to this, and I think maybe it's just the art and the more I've gotten into it, but understanding what Hyperborea is, how it's like this flat Earth, this patch of land that's like orbiting Saturn, and it just has this different feel, and what the creator of the game, Jeff Talanian, did, which still blows my mind, but we actually have like a calendar, and they actually found out like, what's the calendar going to be like if this thing was orbiting around Saturn, and what we see is we have like this 13-year cycle, and you have, more sunlight during different years of the cycle than others. There's 1 year where it's just completely dark because you're, basically blocked from having any sunlight from the sun. So it's just very interesting. So I highly, highly recommend, if you're running this game, to read through the Gazetter. It will help you pull in what it's like to run Hyperborea. You want it to feel alien and weird and different, from the 2 different moons of Serene and Phobos to being able to see the rings of Saturn in the night sky. All of those things will help draw your players in, and then they'll feel like they are in a different place. It is an alien, different society, different world. And so I highly recommend, get the Gazetter, read through it, and it just use it to spark your imagination. When I reviewed this before, I had this thought of, who's going to read through this? Who's going to actually use the calendar? And the more I have played the game, to me, it is an integral part of the setting, so I highly recommend use it. It will make the players feel like they're in a different world. If you pick up this game and you run it like you would in a Forgotten Realms or Ravenloft or Eberron or whatever it is, you're kind of doing a disservice. Really read through the setting itself. Read some of the classic books out there, stuff by Robert Howard or H.P. Lovecraft or anything like that. And because the more that you kind of like dive into the setting itself, the more real it'll feel for the players, and they will love it. I've actually got my community reading old books and things, and I'll send them like, hey, you should go read Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft, or, it's 2 pages, go read that. And I'll just kind of throw this stuff out there, because now there's like, okay, now I'm kind of getting the idea. I'm kind of getting the idea of the setting. So anyway, I could talk about this game forever. I absolutely love it. We are streaming it on our channel, and we're loving it. If you would like to play Hyperborea, you can jump in our Discord. I'll put a link down below, and you can kind of join in the games. We have these little community games. We also have our ongoing Heroes of Hyperborea game that we're playing in, which is a lot of fun. You can catch up on the podcast or on past episodes here on the channel. But I just highly recommend, pick this game up. You can pick it up on DriveThruRPG right now. It is only in PDF form. They got behind on the printing because of the world we live in. Everything is backed up, but I believe that's going to be the first part of 2022, and so we're only a couple months out. But the PDFs are out there. I highly recommend, go download these. You'll love them. There's also an atlas I didn't get a chance to go over that really showcases the land of Hyperborea itself, and they did release an adventure, which I haven't read through yet, The Trapper's Lament. So I will probably do reviews of those later, and I do want to come back and do a full review of this game as we played it more, but I wanted to get my first impression to kind of showcase some of the differences of the game and encourage you to check this game out. It's definitely worth the purchase. Highly, highly recommend. And if you have any questions, you can join. There's a Hyperborea Discord, or you can join the Rolling with Advantage Discord. I'll put links down below. If you have any comments, please let me know. What do you think about the game? What are you looking forward to playing in this? So let's get ready to go crush our enemies, see them driven before you. Until next time, let's keep rolling with advantage. Thanks.